So to review, the first homework program was, hey, I want to give you guys a height in inches and then convert it to feet in inches. You ever wonder, like, if someone says, oh, I'm like 180 centimeters tall, or like I'm 83 inches tall, how many feet in inches it is? I don't know if you guys ever had to ask Google for that. This is just a program that basically does what that calculation is. And if you were to do it out by hand, you could probably do it, but you'd have to do a division followed by figuring out how much remainder it is, which is pretty simple, but we just have a computer do that for us. So I'm going to start off always with an empty project. If you guys, did anyone have problems with their project at home this week? You did? You can.
What do you mean say? When I try to build it, it said I couldn't find it.
Okay, email me next time that happens, because that should be something that I'm going to make an empty project right here, but if it doesn't work for you at home, we need to get that solved, because this should be something that you guys are used to doing over and over again. So an empty project is probably the best thing to do. A couple of you guys ran into some problems last week by not creating an empty project, so we're just going to make a new one. I'm just going to call it source. Okay, so the first homework was write a short program that asks for your height in inches. So I'm just going to copy this here and then put it here, just so I have it as a reference. All right. So as always, I'm going to include IOStream and then create our main function, return 0. So one thing I kind of want to go over today, now that you guys have had a little bit of experience with programming, is share with you guys some of how I approach solving problems, because part of programming is just the actual typing and remembering the syntax and like, what does a loop do? I can't figure out why my program doesn't compile. All these problems that you run into with trying to just wrap your head around the language as well as how to program. So for me, I kind of have learned over the years to approach solving problems, whether it's implementing a feature like when I did the payload game mode for Overwatch. It was kind of a bigger feature than like a typical bug or something small that a designer asked for. It required like a week or so of work to implement. So you kind of have to ask yourself, when you have a big feature, someone asks you to implement something, and you're like, wow, this is going to take like easily a week, maybe 2. How do you even start? Like, how do you even start working on something like that, right? And for you guys, these homework shouldn't take like a week, but it's the similar kind of idea on a smaller scale. Even if I'm supposed to work on something like, I've been working on progression for Overwatch. So I've been working on what rewards you get, how leveling up as well for Overwatch. And something that might be a really large feature or small feature, I approach the same way. Have you guys ever heard of something called the scientific method? Yeah. Which is to like basically take some problem that you're trying to figure out, and do something, change one thing at a time until you get the result. Like you basically change one thing, you observe, see what happens, then you change one more thing and you observe and see what happens. So the reason why I mention that is that a lot of times when I'm working on something, no matter if it's a huge feature or a small feature, I'll try to break down that problem to something that is very, very tiny. Like I basically shatter that problem up into a lot of tiny little tasks. So I don't have to think about everything all at once. I just focus on one little thing at a time. So this is something that I'm going to be consistently doing across the board, especially if I'm doing something new that I've never done before, is to try to do something small just so that I can prove that it works. So perfect example here, right? I just wrote a bunch of code from memory because I've done it like a billion times already. But before I type in any of the homework, the first thing I want to do is I want to build my project, because I want to see if I screwed up anywhere. So I succeeded here, but I could have easily have forgotten a semicolon. I didn't even write any actual code. This is just the startup code that I write every time. So one of the first things you guys should get used to doing is writing as little code as possible and then testing it. So write like 1 line, 2 lines, whatever the minimum amount of code that you can write is, and test that before you move forward. Because if I just go and write a bunch of code, which is like the actual homework solution, and then try to run it and it doesn't work, I don't know how much of it's good or how much of it's bad. I just know that it's wrong somewhere. So the first thing I'm going to do is actually just I'm going to start with just asking for the input for how many inches there are, and then I'm just going to compile. So the first thing I'm going to do is ask, please enter I'm going to do this. I know I said I usually do this, but for the brevity of this class, or for this homework, I'll do that. So that's it. I'm just going to write that and try to run it. Put a breakpoint here. Just want to make sure that runs correctly. Cool. So it's kind of slow, like running it every time I make a change, but it proves that I'm able to print out something to the screen. All right? Because like the worst thing is that you type a bunch of code and it doesn't work right, and then you're trying to struggle to figure out where in the code it's wrong. And it might not be a huge deal for now because like we're not doing like crazy complicated programming. But imagine you're working on a feature like on a game like Overwatch. You're working on a new ability or a new game mode, or you're working on something that is a huge, you're already working in an area that's pretty complex. You don't want to be writing a bunch of code and have to debug that, like figure out why your code doesn't work after you've written it all. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to make a variable called inches. And then I'm just going to spit out that variable. Okay, I'm going to run. I'm going to type 71, and I was able to spit out that I entered 71. Cool. All right, so the next part of this homework was to figure out how many feet you have based on the number of inches, and all it is equal to inches divided by 12. But the reason why this works is because this is an integer, right? So if I spit out that result now, so I just take feet and then equal to inches divided by 12. Hopefully you guys know how many inches are in a foot. All right, so I'm just going to spit out. So I forgot the second one here. So I created a variable called feet. It's an integer, which means it doesn't have any decimal points. Oh, and I did look up why it's called float. Apparently, it's mostly because for a float, you have a decimal point that can float anywhere in that number. It can float around, which means it can be anywhere, either in the front or in the back, and it changes what that value is. But because that decimal point can go anywhere, it can float anywhere, that's why it's called a float, apparently. It's a floating point number, because the point itself can float around. So not that crazy complicated, but that's why they call it a float. So I say, here's my feet. My feet are equal to the number of inches that I entered divided by 12. All right. So I run this, and I'm going to type 71. It says I'm 5 feet tall. What would happen if I didn't use an integer and if I used a float here? If you're not sure, you guys can always test it, right? Yeah. What will happen here? 5 feet? So why is that? Remember, this was like the first homework.
Because there's no floating point.
There's no floating point. So now if I do this, right? Remember, this can screw you over. Oops. So now I see a decimal point. So I kind of tricked you guys because I said, oh, there's a float. But remember, it has to be one of these two numbers has to be a float to get it to be equal to a float. Just because your result is a float. This may or may not be on the midterm. All right, but I want it to be an integer anyway. Either way, I don't want feet to be a floating point number. And then finally, I'm going to have another integer, which is height. What should I call this one? Because I already have a variable called inches. I want a new variable that represents my feet, height remainder. I'm going to call it the height remainder. So I gave you guys a hint as to how you get the remaining inches that are left over. And I kind of told you guys we're going to do more of this stuff today when we're doing our dice rolling program. But it's the same exact operation, only instead of using a division operation, you're using the modulus operation. Because this right here gives us back the remainder, the stuff that's left over, after a division. If I spit that out. In this case here, I'm going to actually delete this line, because I want to spit out 5 feet, height remainder, inches. Like that. Okay? So basically I have one here that calculates my height in feet, one here that calculates my height in inches after I've already done the feet operation. You're 5 feet 11 inches tall. Did anyone try to put like a little thing here? It's like a little quote. If you ever want to put an actual quote, because you notice that we're actually using double quotes here. If you want to put the actual double quote symbol, you can just put what's called this escape character here. This escape character is just a backslash, and it just means treat the next character that comes after as an actual, just put it in the string. Don't even try to like parse it, which means now I can actually have it here as part of inches. So now I see that it's 5 feet 11 inches tall. Let's put a different number in here, maybe, I don't know, 90. 90 inches is 7 feet 6 inches tall. You guys ever try weird numbers, like negative 71?
Negative 5 feet in.
Mm-hmm. I encourage you guys to do random crap like that and see what happens. Like, what if I don't even enter a number? What if I just enter that?
Garbage.
It converted that value, which is a string, into a number, which apparently is negative, and then converted it to feet and inches. All right. Even more stuff you can try. You ever try copying the Gettysburg Address in there?
I like how that's your go-to. That's just your go-to. I like that.
You don't know? You don't have the Gettysburg Address memorized?
No, right? You know, I'm ashamed that I don't.
It's a speech by U.S. President Abraham Lincoln.
The original one or the one he said?
We'll just copy this
I
here.
just remember 4 score and 7 years ago.
Yeah, that's pretty much all most people remember. I got the same result. Because like, well, this string here, that's the value of it. This is basically, it's not actually converting every character. It's not like adding up all these numbers. It's taking the result of what a string is, no matter what it is, and converting it to that value. So strings aren't obviously, it's not expecting a string. So it's like, well, you told me it was an int, so I'm going to give it to you as an integer, and this is apparently what it is. And notice I actually cut it off too. Like I couldn't actually copy all of it in there, which is a shame. It only copied like this line here. So let's try this one here. Because there's breaks in there. I think I'm having too much fun doing this. There we go.
Wow.
Same exact result.
Same number.
All right. Okay, any questions on the homework? So it's pretty simple. Like the tricky part is just knowing that, okay, you can use the same number of inches 2 different ways based on the operation that you perform. All right. So the second homework, which was actually like probably the bigger one, is I asked you guys to write like a program that kind of simulates an RPG character taking damage from a dot. So I have you ask for health, and then you basically take damage on a character until they die, and then when you're done, write game over. All right. So I'm going to delete all this because we don't need it. And this time I'm going to show you a little bit more about how you break apart the problem. It might be a little tricky. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to ignore the fact that I even have a loop at all. I'm just going to write this program as if the homework doesn't say write a loop. I just want to write a program that asks for health and then spits that health out. And maybe then I'll have the health reduced by 12. All right. So I'm just going to ask for health. All right. And I'm just going to spit that out. You currently have again, this is all I'm going to write. Literally, I'm not doing any math yet. I'm just doing the input. I'm going to ask for 150 health. And it says, okay, cool, I have 150 health. So right below this, I'm just going to write health equal to health minus 12. For those of you guys, you can also write this like that. So instead of doing health equals health minus 12, remember there's an operator. It is a minus equals that will do that same exact thing. These two things are equivalent. Oops, sorry. These two things are the same. This is health minus 12. This is the same thing. It's health minus 12. All right. So I'm going to subtract 12 health. I'm going to call it take damage. Give him a dot. I'm going to put a little comment right there to explain what this line is doing. And then I'm going to spit out health again. I'm going to run. Cool. So I could repeat this pattern, right? A bunch. Hopefully none of you guys did this.
I was going to.
150 health. Okay, I didn't subtract enough. Maybe if I... and it also doesn't work if I have like 300,000 health. Right? So...
Well, then you just clearly are too strong for the poison on the lid.
yeah, the poison ran out of ticks, right? So this is the part that I want to have repeat, right? Like that's what I just copied. I copied these two lines. You guys notice a pattern in what I'm trying to do? Like these two lines are the same as these two lines, same as this. I'm repeating the same lines of code. So instead of writing that out though, this is where the loop comes in, right? Like I can just, instead of doing this by hand, why don't I just stick a while in front of it? And for now, I'm just going to make it true. I'm not going to worry about the condition at all. I'm just going to do this. All right. This is the syntax for a while loop, right? It's the keyword while with your expression here inside parentheses. And then you have your block of code that follows it, what you want your loop to run. Okay? So I'm going to enter 30,000. Cool. Looks like it's doing the right thing. But the problem is it doesn't stop, right? It gets to 0 and then just keeps going. So this condition here is true, which means that it will loop forever. You guys remember, I'm going to do a quick review of how the while loop works, right? So if I enter 10,000 health, the while loop says, is this thing true? If it is, let me turn on line numbers. If not, line number 19 is true, go to line number 21, right? Do whatever's 21 and 22. Okay, it's going to go back to line number 19. Is this true still? Yes. So go back into loop. And it keeps doing this forever because this thing will never evaluate to false. It'll only be able to escape once this thing goes to false. So if I type false here, it's going to go here. It says, okay, is this thing true or not? It's not, so it's going to jump right to the end. Okay, so we can't obviously write just true or false here. We actually have to write a condition that's based on some expression. In this case, we want this thing to stop when your health is less than or equal to 0, right? Because that's when you die. That's typically when you die in a game, right? So if I just write health less than or equal to 0 here. Wait, that's not right. We want this thing to loop as long as you're above 0. If you are still alive, right? What does it mean to be alive in an RPG? It means your health is above 0, right? Okay. So now in this loop, I'm just going to do a small number. I'm going to do 20. So my health is currently 20. I don't know if you guys can see that. 20. I'm going to step. Goes to 8. I'm going to go back up to 19. Is health greater than 0 still? It is, so it goes into 21. Okay. Now what is health? Health is -4. Where does it go after this? 19, right? It still has to see if that thing is true. Now that thing is false and it goes to the end. All right? And here, all I want to do is do cout game over. I'm going to change this to be you took 12 damage. Your health is now. I'm just going to reformat this a little bit to represent what we're actually doing. Maybe not 30,000. Let's do 1,000. Cool. And we'll put a breakpoint here. See, ran through pretty fast. It took like less than a second to run through all that damage. So this computer is probably running this loop, I don't know, 5,000 or 6,000 times per second. I could probably get through this. Looks like it took about 1.79 seconds, so maybe a little bit less than that, more like 600 times per second. So our game's running at 600 FPS, which is pretty nice. You don't even need a good graphics card for it. So that's basically how I approached this problem, right? I started off with out a loop. I didn't even write a loop. I just wrote what I wanted it to do. And then I surrounded what I wanted to repeat inside of a loop. Okay? Questions? Yeah. Yeah. You don't even need another variable. So if you did make another variable, it does make it a little bit nicer. If you have poison equals 12, right? You could replace poison here instead of doing 12 if you wanted to. And here too. You don't have to you'd have to do something like this. Poison. And then you can change poison to be, I don't know, 50 if you wanted to. But you don't need to. Like our game only lets you take one bit of damage. So instead of, you could make a variable for that. You can also just change this to be 50 here and 50 here if you wanted to. Right, so here, this is the same as me saying health minus 50. Like health is equal to...
In the wild, when you did less than...
Oh, less than or equal to this one here?
Yeah.
So what is... So, okay, so let's just step through and see what it actually does. It'll be a little easier to see. But this is saying, hey, is my health less than or equal to 0? So if I enter 100 as my health, right? So what is my health right now? 100, right? So if I substitute health here for 100, is this thing true or false? Is 100 less than 0? It's not a trick question. Yes, false, right? Is 100 less than or equal to 0? No, because 100 is obviously greater than 0. So what's going to happen to this little yellow arrow over here? Where is it going to go? Yeah, going to go to the end. So if I step right here, it goes right there. Skips over it. Because this thing was false. Okay? That's why if you flip it and put health in here instead, so notice it's greater than 0. So basically it says take damage as long as you have more than 0 health. If it was like this, this thing says take damage as long as you have less than 0 health. It's like you flipped it, and which means that this thing will never run.
Can it also do the same with greater than equal to? Is that also the same or not?
So this one here will mean that let's say I take 50 damage, right? And I give myself 50 health. Oops. Sorry, I'll do this. So I'm going to type in 50 health. Right? And then let's see what it is. So health is currently 50. Cool. So it actually goes inside of it now because it's greater than 0. I'm going to subtract 50 health. Now my health is 0. All right? So it's going to go back up here. Is this true or false? True. So what are you going to do? You have 0 health right now. You're already dead, and you're actually taking more damage. So now I have negative 50 health. Well, like, I was at 0. I had died, and I took 1 more point of damage, which doesn't make sense. So that's why you want to make sure that this is only greater than. Otherwise, you're going to run into a case. This would be considered a bug. Like, this would be like in an RPG where if you took exactly the right amount of damage to put you at 0, you would still be alive, like in a Pokemon game. And that's why you want to make sure that this thing doesn't do that. Yeah. This thing actually happens more than you would think, like screwing up like which one of these to use. You have to think carefully about whether you want to use greater than or greater than equal to, depending on the situation. So, all right. Okay. Any other questions on the homework? All right, let's review real quick what last week we did. So we went over if statements, relational operators, switch statements, while loops, and do while loops. These are all ways to control how your program runs. Without these, your program literally just runs from top to bottom and never stops, and there's no variety, and literally it's just you don't interact with your game, and your game is really sad. To review the relation operators, these are basically what the relation operators have. Remember that the results of these, what the evaluation result do. So you have equals to, not equals to, greater than, less than, greater than or equal to, and less than or equal to, right? So those are all the results. These are all from the book. If you have a question about these, we use these all over the place. These are used in both if statements and while loops, right? You can even set variables equal to the results of this. They don't have to be inside of an if statement. You're allowed to do these comparisons anywhere. So here's an example of where you would use it. Inside that expression there is where you would use some of those relational operators. So an if statement, again, is you write your if, you put your expression, and if that's true, it'll run the statement, right? Because that should be pretty clear, hopefully, because we're about to write some code based on that. An if-else statement means that if that expression is true, go ahead and run that first statement. Otherwise, if it's false, run statement 2. And an if-else if allows you to write as many of those conditions as you want based on those expressions. A switch statement is like an if-else if. You can convert any if-else if block to a switch statement as long as you're using an integer as your expression. Okay. So this is what I want you guys to do right now, which is, this is a little bit of a review, but it's also using more if-else if statements. I wanted to give you guys this last week, but we ran out of time. So I just want you guys to kind of mimic a text-based hero select in Overwatch, which is you are going to ask the player for a number from 0. It's actually 0 to 4, I guess, because the numbers here, there's 5 heroes, but each number will represent a hero that you want to play as. If I typed 0, I want you to say, hey, I picked Tracer. If I type 1, I want you to say, you pick Reaper. If I type 2, I want you to say you pick Pharah. 3, you pick Widowmaker. 4, you pick Mercy. That's it. So based on a number that the player typed in, I want you to spit out one of these 5 different results. Okay? And if you're not sure how to do this, you're going to be using this if-else if to solve it. So the first thing I want you to do is ask for a number, I guess from 0 to 4. And based on that number, using an if-else if statement plus these, you're going to spit out one of these 4 or one of these 5 results. Okay. So I'll give you guys about half an hour to do this, and I'm going to come around and make sure you guys have everything set up, and then we'll review, and I'll show you guys how to do it.